Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kalina Shukarova-Savovska, and I am a Senior Financial Management Specialist at the WorldBank Center for Financial Reporting Reform here in Vienna, Austria. Today, joining with me from Vienna is Piotr Piziak from the CFRR. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this distance learning event with a focus on technology and data analytics, titled Leveraging Data Analytics to Add Value for SMEs. This event is organized under the EU Reparis program of the Audit Training of Trainers activity. It is made possible with the generous financial support of the European Union. We would like to thank the International Federation of Accountants and its SMP committee, as well as the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, for their significant support with this virtual event and the Audit Trainer of Trainers program. SMPs, small and medium-sized practices, face unique and distinct challenges when it comes to the use of technology and data analytics relative to larger accountancy firms. For example, the top 3 SMP challenges when it comes to technology found by the IFAC 2006 SMP survey in Europe include 45% of respondents expressed a high and very high challenge when it came to investing and staying current with software. 45% of participants identified this to be a high and very high challenge. Determining what technology is best for their practice, 40% expressed a high and very high challenge. And the last challenge, the last of the top 3, is achieving a digital paperless environment. On the other hand, the benefits for using technology and data analytics are widely understood among smaller practitioners, and many realize that in order to stay relevant for their SME clients, employing technology and data analytics is necessary. This session today will showcase a possible example how SMPs can employ data analytics solutions to add value to their SME clients, and will also provide further insights and relevant considerations for SMPs in the area of data analytics. We will also hear preliminary insight into the responses from the IAASB Data Analytics Working Group and on its document of exploring the growing use of technology in the audit with a focus on data analytics. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have 3 distinguished speakers with us. I will briefly introduce them. We have joining us today Mark Edmondson, who is Chief Executive and founder of Inflo. Mark is a specialist in the use of technology within compliance services, such as external audit. He helps accounting firms of all sizes advance their productivity and quality of work, while creating a stronger value proposition to increase fee income from existing and new clients. So, ladies and gentlemen, we also have with us Katharine Bagshaw, who is member of the IFAC Small and Medium Practices Committee and is a chair of the IAASB Rapid Response Task Force. Katharine oversees the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales work on international standards on auditing. She is secretary to the ICAEW's ISA implementation subgroup and its public company accounting oversight board panel. Katharine is an author of numerous articles and publications on ISA. Last but not least, we have Robert Dohrer, who is chair of the IAASB Data Analytics Working Group. Robert was nominated to the IAASB in 2015 by the American Institute of CPAs. Presently, Bob is based in the London office and is a global leader for quality and risk at RSM International Limited, where he has overall responsibility for audit and attest service policies, procedures, and guidance. He is chairman of the AACPA Assurance Services Executive Committee, and previously he served as a member of the American Institute of CPA Auditing Standards Board. I will also add a few technical notes. So participants are joining either via WebEx connection or through VC connections with the following venues: Albania, Tirana, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Sarajevo, from Kosovo, Pristina, Macedonia, Skopje, Montenegro, Podgorica, and Serbia, Belgrade. Participants from Romania, Bulgaria, Estonia, and Croatia will also be joining via WebEx. In order to have a successful session, I would like to repeat again, please keep your microphones muted throughout the session. Participants who are joining via WebEx should make sure that the mute button is on at all times when not speaking. In case a site is dropped, then please redial to join if through WebEx connection or seek IT support if you are joining from a WorldBank venue. Again, I remind participants to keep their microphones muted at all times. Thank you very much. Let me now hand over to our first speaker, Mark Edmondson. So, Mark, if you hear us, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Kalina, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to talk to you today, and I'm very excited to be part of this presentation, which I think is going to be a fantastic topic and area for discussion. As Kalina introduced, my name is Mark Edmondson. I am the CEO and lead founder of the software business InFlow. And today I'm going to give you a presentation and practical demonstration of some of the ways that technology and data analytics specifically can be very easily and quickly incorporated into accountancy services and how our solution tackles a number of the barriers and challenges that have previously not allowed SMPs and SME clients access to these kind of technologies. So I will go through a number of areas here today, and I will be touching on our response to the IAASB's recent request for input, which I know Bob will be going through in more detail as a collection towards the end of this session. But I will go through my part first and hopefully bring to life for you how these kind of tools and techniques are available and relevant to the work of SMPs working with SMEs all over the world. On the next slide, Kalina, I've just outlined the agenda that I wanted to go through today, and I will firstly set the scene in terms of what is InFlow. I will touch on the current state of the technology market and some of the challenges that are immediately faced by SMPs who are looking to incorporate these kind of techniques into their business and their working practices. I will do a demonstration of our solution, focusing on some of the key areas to give some practical examples of how these techniques can be used. And I will touch more generally on our approach to working with SMPs and working across the profession at large, and why we are investing time with people like yourselves to open up this area and to give these kind of demonstrations to showcase what is possible now in the current technology market. On the next slide, I just give an introduction as to what InFlow is. And InFlow, for context, is a cloud-based application, which means that it is available anywhere on any device. You only need an internet connection and you have full access to full functionality of our solution. It requires no specialist skills, so people can immediately start using this kind of technology and the intuitive design of the system, so auditors do not need to be reskilled in the way that they need to perform their work, and clients can easily start collaborating and working with their auditors or accountants in a more digital and more collaborative way. We use our cloud environment to ensure that we meet the high standard and high expectations of all accountancy firms in relation to the protection of data and in terms of the professional services that they are providing. And our solution meets the local jurisdictional and legislation requirements of every particular territory through using the Microsoft Azure platform and all of the functionality and security aspects that are available for people who partner with Microsoft in this area. Our solution means that you have no hardware and no software setup fees, so that takes out one of the big barriers in terms of the level of investment that is needed in these kind of tools and technologies. It is a very simple and very easy to get started way of working, and we've focused on being able to provide to accountants and auditors an end-to-end data analytics solution. And what we mean by that is that we're able to not only pull all of the data from an accounting system at a client, but also automate a lot of the work that would previously have required very specialist data scientist skills and very expert individuals to be able to support auditors in their work, or alternatively needing to reskill auditors in very specialist skills. So what we are providing is what we call a configurable data analytics platform, which means that our solution can be used by some of the largest international networks and can be incorporated into their methodologies and working practices across thousands of clients across multiple territories, or it can be used by smaller one-partner firms who want to immediately use it on some of their smaller engagements. It can be very easily and flexibly used across a broad spectrum of different clients and SMP firms. On the next slide, I touch on some of the benefits of these kind of techniques, and Kalina has already touched on some of these as part of the introduction. But what we're really trying to focus on here is using modern technology, using more digital technology to provide a better experience, firstly, to our clients and to the staff that are working in our accountancy firm. Can we move away from paper-based techniques or large levels of emails and files being moved on memory sticks to a much more collaborative and digital experience that uses smartphones, uses tablet devices, and is a much more interactive and engaging and valuable experience? We work in a very heavily regulated market, and we must respect quality at all times. And that's why our solution always focuses on making sure that the quality of work that is being performed and automated is appropriate, and it is improving the quality of the work that's being performed. And that's both in terms of the work that we're documenting on our files, but also the value that is being received by our clients from our compliance or advisory services. We also see technology as a huge opportunity for productivity. So how can we move away from manual processes which involve a lot of time and effort of qualified individuals and automate certain aspects of the work that lends itself well to automation, and then allow auditors and accountants to focus on things that are much more valuable and much more beneficial to the clients that they are working with. And we do see the level of change and level of development that's occurring in the market at this point in time as a key driver for differentiation at the moment. The market has very much been in a state of consistency for many years, And the change in technology is allowing firms who are embracing these kind of technologies and techniques earlier to achieve a differentiation in the service that they are offering and the way that they are working with clients. And we are very much seeing some very strong early mover advantages from some of the firms who are more quickly adopting these kind of techniques. On the next slide, I wanted to touch on the work that we do outside of just simply working on our software. This here today is an example of a number of the things that we do to try and promote the opportunity here and to open up to firms and to PAOs as to what this technology means to them and to the profession at large. So we work with a number of PAOs to help them understand what we are doing and for us to understand the challenges that they are facing in their market, in their profession, and what their members are looking for help with. And we're very much engaging with the key stakeholders across the profession. So we're very much trying to engage with all of the key stakeholders that have a very interesting and varied viewpoint on the things that are going on in the market. So this is one example. We also work with a number of other organizations to try and just showcase, do workshops to educate in terms of, while there's plenty of materials and thought leadership papers and white papers out there, we take a more practical based approach to really opening up what this is and what this means. And we take that thought leadership role incredibly seriously, both now in terms of the trend in terms of data analytics and how these kind of techniques can be incorporated right now immediately, and also as the technology landscape changes and things such as machine learning and AI capabilities start to mature and start to be more practically applicable to this field, we are well positioned to go through that journey with these key stakeholders and the other firms more broadly across the profession. So in terms of the IAASB's work, which is touched on my next slide, we were delighted to be able to contribute to the request for input, which, as I touched on, Bob will be talking about in more detail shortly on this presentation. But what we were keen to contribute to was the area of the current state of the market and the challenges that were present and prohibiting a more broader adoption of these kind of techniques. And so what we were really looking at was the real drivers for us actually creating and forming the business Inflo was specifically to try and address these challenges and to make these kind of techniques more accessible to people more broadly across the profession. And so we touched on here some of those challenges which very much did exist and very much were prohibiting the broader application of these techniques. And they were things like data acquisition, because one of the biggest barriers to this entire field is being able to get from a client accounting system the data that is valid and complete for you to be able to use these kind of data analytical techniques. Fundamentally, you cannot do anything unless you have the data that is valid and complete, and you can consistently achieve that from client accounting systems. And the biggest challenge is how many different accounting systems are used by all of the different clients that most accounting firms work with. We did some research ourselves, and we very quickly, even just in the UK, got to over 300 different accounting systems being used by by clients of accounting firms, which is an incredibly complex area to try to address. To address that, the only way to do that previously was by having specialist resource in your business. So the big firms who had made significant investments in these kind of technologies had also made significant investments in centralized specialists who would be able to do the extraction routines and load the data into the tools that they had built. And so that was another significant investment and reskilling task, which was very prohibitive to using these techniques. That also led to a lot of retraining, so people either needing to be more involved in data specialist skills or being able to understand how to incorporate these outputs into methodologies. And across the whole piece here, this was incredibly challenging because the tools that were available on the market were not necessarily designed for this specific use case and this specific way of working with data. And so to be able to develop something that was more scalable and simpler to use and automated some of the real challenge areas, we really took a hard look at these challenges and set ourselves the challenge of being able to, for example, automatically obtain from client systems all of the data that we need to be able to perform these routines. How do we make the user interfaces so simple that the auditors don't need retraining and they don't need any help from specialists? They can do all this themselves, combined with a system that automates these pieces. And how do we make sure that each firm doesn't have to make a significant upfront investment to be able to try these kind of technologies? How do we use a more subscription-based principle to allow people to access this and try this and see how this works for them before they make a full commitment to incorporating these technologies into their business? I'm always delighted to be talking to people about the application of this to SMPs, though, and on the next slide, I very much touch on why I personally believe that SMPs are actually incredibly well positioned to take advantage of the current developments in the market here. SMEs are traditionally very much able to work closely with their clients. They're more agile and they're able to make decisions more quickly because it is often easier to adopt these kind of changes and new ways of working when you are having to modify across a smaller number of people and a smaller number of clients. And because SMPs are very familiar with working flexibly with their clients, working with them in very different ways to add value to their business, this allows them to use these kind of techniques and technologies in a more flexible way and more quickly start trialing and testing how these could work for them. I see this as a real opportunity for SMPs, and I see that a number of them that are working with us that are forward thinking are achieving some significant benefits from being early adopters or being very proactive in sharing with us the ideas that they want to use and apply these tools to their particular client base. And the final piece I'll just touch on before we go into the demonstration is in terms of, and on the next slide, Kalina, the approach that we've taken in terms of the actual setup of the software. So we've designed what we call a modular approach to this. And what I mean by that is that we've broken down our solution into 6 different key components of the tool, which an audit firm, an accountancy firm can evaluate as a firm and decide what is relevant to their particular firm, and can also be flexibly applied on a client by client basis. Because we're from the profession and because we understand the challenges of working with many different clients, we recognize that not every single client wants to work with you, the accounting firm, in exactly the same way. Some people are looking for different things from their advisors. And so we will, in the demonstration, be giving a quick overview of each one of these 6 modules to just give you a flavor for the different techniques that are in them.
Modern business is more globalized and complex than ever before. Even SMEs have hundreds of thousands, even millions of transactions being processed every year. This makes audit work over key fraud areas almost impossible without the use of technology. Using data analytics to analyze every transaction in a population allows auditors to focus on transactions with characteristics that point to a higher risk of fraud, misstatement, or error, leading to a more robust, more valuable audit. Such in-depth analysis often identifies areas of control weakness or inefficient process. Auditors can also offer insight and perspective to their SME clients. InFlow's Interrogate and Evaluate module uses data analytics to perform a suite of 24 different tests to identify common characteristics such as large value journals, round sum amounts, or entries made on non-working days, as well as a range of InFlow's own proprietary tests. Each test includes a full explanation of the criteria applied so that auditors can easily understand the risk characteristics being evaluated. Auditors can also create custom tests to address any specific fraud risks identified for each individual client, without the need for scripting. Multi-dimensional risk scoring can then be applied across the entire population of entries to identify those posing the highest risk of misstatement for audit testing. For each of the tests, the auditor can instantly see who has made the postings, when they were made, and the accounts impacted. Anomalies are immediately identified and investigated. Commentary can be added to explain the decisions made, which will then form part of the audit documentation. Benchmarking functionality in InFlow also allows auditors to assess the frequency of failure on each test against other entities in the same industry, region, or using the same accounting software. This puts the information presented in relevant context, helping the auditor to fully assess the risk posed by each group of transactions. These dashboards can also be shared with client staff. In our experience, clients are very interested in the results of these analytics, which analyze their business from a different perspective. This has led to audit firms being asked to perform additional assurance engagements, analyzing journal activity on a more regular basis and reporting to client management, for example through quarterly review engagements. InFlow automatically produces a testing template to prepare compliant documentation. The journal entries selected are pre-populated, and the auditor documents the work performed by completing the documentation template. A PDF report details the multi-dimensional risk scoring applied and any narrative commentary added by the auditor. This documentation can then be added to the audit work papers. As in all InFlow modules, inbuilt tutorials explain how to get the most from the system, minimizing the level of training required by users. There are also detailed guidance documents embedded into the system, which cover in greater detail each of the 24 tests included in the Interrogate and Evaluate module, and support on how to integrate InFlow's approach into your audit methodology. Using data analytics for fraud testing is a powerful way for auditors of SMEs to focus on relevant audit risks and identify truly anomalous transactions, whilst also providing insight and value to their clients. Journal entry testing is the most common area these data analytics have been applied to date. But having access to this level of data from a client then unlocks many other areas of possibility for accountants. Risk assessment analytics are an integral part of audit planning procedures. Leveraging the power of data analytics and process automation, auditors can quickly identify key areas of focus for the audit and highlight unusual or unexpected trends. Powerful visualizations bring balances and transactions to life, and drill-down functionality allows auditors to explore and interrogate large data sets. Audit teams can develop detailed understanding of their client's business at a granular level that was previously not possible. InFlow's Assess and Scope module uses data imports to automate the preparation of risk assessment analytics. Auditors have the option to set a robust expectation to use as the comparative basis for their analytics. For example, if an auditor knows that there was a 3% increase on the client's building rent during the year, this can be factored into the expected balance. Movements that fall outside of the auditor's expectation are then investigated further. InFlow's visualizations allow auditors to quickly understand a balance, see unusual trends, and focus audit testing. As InFlow works on any device, the auditor can sit with an iPad with their client to discuss how the balances have moved. Explanations can be immediately validated by drilling down into balances right down to the individual transaction level. Auditors can demonstrate their professional skepticism by verifying client explanations at the click of a button. They can then add their own comments to document their work and the conclusions drawn. Where items are identified that require further investigation, samples can be generated directly from the risk assessment work. For example, in this analysis of rent, it is clear that there is a large unusual posting made in June. We can save this to make sure we include anything identified at the risk assessment stage as part of our substantive testing work. Once the module has been completed, a PDF report is generated which captures all of the comments added and actions taken by the auditor. High-quality audit documentation is produced automatically based on the source data obtained directly from the financial system, freeing up the audit team from repetitive compliance tasks. This allows auditors to focus their attention on better understanding the business, analysing the key areas of risks, and evaluating their impact on the overall audit strategy.
What we've just shown there in the first part of the demonstration is two very common and quite easy to use applications for using data as part of the audit process. Using it to perform risk assessment as part of our planning process, and using it to be able to perform characteristic-based tests to perform anomaly detection towards fraud and some of the work over ISA 240 or SAS 99 if you're working on a US engagement. But using the data in this way is while it's an easier stepping stone for auditors who are looking to start using these techniques, it's still only valid and useful if we've gone through an appropriate process to obtain and validate all of the data that we need from the client accounting system. And this is a very important step in the process. It's not the most visual and the most engaging, but it is critical to being able to use and rely on these kind of visualizations and these kind of techniques as part of your audit process. And so we have developed as the part of the first building block of the system, the request and share module we'll touch on here, which comes obviously before the bit that we've shown there in the demonstration. A very easy to use, what we call a data upload wizard, which is designed to take the pain out of the data extraction, preparation and transformation process, and also to perform appropriate validation and completeness procedures to ensure that the data is something that we can rely upon. Now, the process we've designed is designed around flexibility. It allows clients or auditors to perform the process, but in most circumstances, the client is able to quite simply and easily provide the data that's needed directly, securely, and through encrypted methods, the data from their system to the Inflo system, meaning that the audit teams do not need to be involved in this specialist activity whatsoever. The teams can also do this on multiple times during the engagement. For example, teams can obtain a data set from the client at an interim phase or at the planning stage for example, 9 months of the year, and start planning engagements earlier, getting themselves familiar with the different visualizations and how they can be incorporated into their audit process. So we go through a number of steps to get from the source accounting system. We use different techniques such as automated connectors, we use database backups, we use reports from accounting systems, we also use APIs, for example, with a number of the cloud-based providers. And we specialize in that activity, and we can do this to save a lot of time and expertise with the accounting firms. It's important to make sure that all of this flows and feeds through to the documentation as well, because what we want to make sure is that we can clearly articulate on the audit file not just how we got the data, but also a full audit trail of everything that was performed and executed over that data set, to be able to clearly demonstrate to any external or internal review of that file exactly how we are comfortable with the reliability of the data that's been provided. And often these kind of techniques are much more reliable and much less susceptible to manipulation than reliance upon Excel reports. If, for example, we're able to extract all of the accounting entries directly from the databases behind the accounting system or from a backup file, these are incredibly difficult to be manipulated, and therefore we can be much more confident in the data that we're using and relying upon. The module for request and share also acts as a very powerful and configurable project management solution as well, to be able to get things that aren't necessarily in the accounting system and simply collaborate and share information more securely and more digitally between the accounting firm and their client. And this takes out the need to email very confidential information between one another, which has a number of concerns, obviously, in this modern world. This allows people to then really rely on the visualizations that they're seeing and be confident in the findings that they're identifying and what that means for the business that they're working with. Kalina will carry on with the demonstration, if that's okay, please.
Technology can be used as a powerful tool to standardize and automate routine procedures. While more process automation than data analytics, InFlow's Verify and Review module ensures that your sample selection is always correctly performed in line with your methodology. It also reduces the time spent by your client providing detailed listings and reports that can instead be obtained directly from the datasets obtained by Inflo. Inflo Verify and Review automates key parts of the audit process alongside existing documentation software and methodologies, avoiding the need to change software or retrain audit staff. The sample selection is tailored to reflect the terminology and methodology used by your organization. This ensures that samples selected through Inflo will always be compliant and justifiable. This also allows for the capture of powerful management information to understand how audit teams are applying the methodology to balances and to compare average sample size across all clients. As in other Inflo modules, a testing template is pre-populated, creating efficiencies in data input and ensuring consistency and quality of documentation. These work papers document the Inflo processes, audit team judgments, and testing performed. These can be then exported to form part of the overall audit documentation. Automation of processes such as these enhance quality and remove the time auditors currently spend performing data entry to document their work. Auditors can also work more flexibly and digitally with their clients. For example, auditors can use tablet devices to perform their work, can remotely select and share samples for testing, with clients then able to use mobile devices to capture photographic evidence and return this to their auditors for verification. InFlow Insights uses client financial data along with other non-financial information to calculate a range of KPIs, measures, and statistics that can provide an alternative perspective on a business and deliver real value to clients. Analysis of an entity using ratios can be a key part of the overall planning and risk assessment process. Metrics such as liquidity or profitability ratios may, for example, highlight to auditors issues over going concern or covenant compliance. Common financial ratios across areas of liquidity, gearing, productivity, and profitability are automatically calculated, which can then be benchmarked against a population of other businesses. Peer group filters can then be applied to narrow comparisons, for example to businesses in the same industry or of a similar size. The auditor can understand the risk profile of their client like never before. Inflow Insights can also highlight opportunities for business improvement through a greater focus on KPIs and statistics relevant to the success of the business. Clients can see what good looks like, identifying areas where they are outperforming their peers, but also drawing attention to parts of their business requiring improvement. This can enhance the value of compliance work and provide additional assurance and advisory engagement opportunities for firms. Presenting benchmarking dashboards to clients as part of audit meetings is a great opportunity to demonstrate how an audit delivers more value to a business than simply an unqualified audit opinion. Auditors can use data analytics to deliver insight and an external perspective to their clients, acting as trusted advisors supporting business improvement. Inflow Focus and Assure provides an innovative viewpoint across large transaction populations. This is radically changing the way audit services can be performed. It combines the power of the latest technology with the fundamental principles of double-entry bookkeeping. Process mining and relationship mapping of every accounting entry across expected business processes quickly identifies anomalous transactions and demonstrates standard items. This is also an area relevant to machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques. InFlow's unique visualizations are simple to interpret, allowing auditors to analyze relationships between transactions, general ledger accounts, and balances. And meaningful conclusions can be drawn across thousands or millions of transactions where manual techniques would simply be impossible. This then unlocks new possibilities for collecting audit evidence. These data analytical techniques can replace or reduce core substantive testing. Here, all revenue transactions can be traced through to receivable entries and cash receipts, automatically analyzing 100% of revenue items through to cash settlement. Rather than blindly sampling the balance, the audit team can instead test the higher risk anomalies, automating the collection of audit evidence over lower risk revenue entries and focusing attention on the judgmental areas of revenue recognition. This approach often identifies areas of control weakness, either through ineffective control design or implementation. The breadth of information and understanding that can be given to clients using the Focus and Assure module transforms the way in which business management perceive the experience of being audited and the value the audit service brings. While such techniques must be complemented by other auditing procedures, these more advanced data analytics offer a way for auditors to embed a new approach to evidence gathering, moving away from inefficient sampling approaches and instead executing an audit approach with client value at its core. No matter what industry a client operates in, these techniques are proving to be effective, efficient, and incredibly valuable to clients. And it's fun to work in this way.
Thank you, Kalina. We've shown hopefully a bit of a breadth there in terms of, and I think that's reflective of the technology at its core, around the different progressions and the different levels of sophistication in terms of the techniques that can be utilized and are available. And the modular approach that I touched on, and the reason why we have broken it into 6 different modules, is to allow firms to embrace these techniques at their own pace and to bring them into their business at an appropriate path for their appetite for change. And so we have a number of SMPs who will adopt and utilize all 6 modules of the system across all of their clients. And we have others who will focus on perhaps a smaller number, for perhaps the earlier ones we showed around journal entries and risk assessment, to allow their teams to get more familiar with these kind of techniques before then progressing to the more advanced capabilities when they are more comfortable using data and working in this way with their clients. And that is also reflective of the way that we approach the way we run our business and the way that we engage with the profession at large. We very much believe that domain knowledge, the awareness of the regulations, the auditing and accounting standards, the methodologies that are prevalent in the markets, and the real focus and diligence that is needed over data integrity, it is fundamental to the value here. and the ability for firms to go on this journey of using these techniques. We see that advanced insights are immediately available, that once we are able to obtain data sets from clients and we're able to start advancing from simply looking at that one data set to looking at multiple data sets, we can start to blend in things like benchmarking and more powerful trend analyses and explorations. And then we can really move towards the more intelligent analytics, which we touched on with the journals, where we have the multi-dimensional risk scoring and a real focus on anomaly detection. And then we start to move towards the more fascinating area that's really emerging around cognitive computing. A lot of buzzwords in this field, but really about how do we use these kind of techniques to move away from the traditional ways of audit work and adopt these kind of cutting edge techniques to, as we showed as part of the Focus and Assure module, the ability to analyze every single accounting transaction, to do 100% population work, and to really focus in on what does that mean for the way that we collect audit evidence and the way that we approach testing of accounts and balances. And that's a really specialized field, and we provide a heck of a lot of support for teams to be able to understand what these techniques mean and how they can be incorporated into their existing methodologies in compliance with the existing accounting and auditing standards frameworks. We hear a lot of people whose default position might be the auditing standards don't enable data analytics, and we very much come from a mindset of they certainly don't prohibit these kind of techniques, and there are a lot of ways that these principles can be immediately brought into engagements right now and make a very big difference in terms of the quality of the work that's being performed and the overall experience. And we're trying to do this as a collective. We work on the next slide, and my final slide, Kalina. I'll just recap and touch on that. We're taking a view here that we want to help the profession as a whole, and we want to work very collaboratively with people to be able to progress and incorporate technology and emerging technology into the existing working practices and the existing profession that is there. We do that through very strong engagement with existing stakeholders. We invest a lot of time and effort to educate and to share content and share ideas in terms of how these techniques can be used. And that's reflective in the firms that we work with. We work with people who want to share ideas and want to collaborate, and the pricing and the way that we do that in terms of trying to remove every single barrier that there is here that would stop a firm trying to use these techniques. How do we try to open these up and embrace them as a profession at large? Because I think at this point in time, everybody recognizes that this is a fantastic opportunity to improve the quality of the work that's being done and improve the profession at large. And we want to be one of the key enablers that facilitate that across the profession. So I hope you found the presentation and demonstration interesting today. I'm very pleased and thankful to Kalina and the team more broadly for this opportunity to talk here today. And I do believe there's a time at the end of the session for some Q&A, but I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, and I'm happy to now pass over to Kalina and the other presenters who'll be following me here today. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and showcase. As you mentioned, there will be a Q&A session at the end, so participants can ask further questions at that time. Now let me hand over to Katharine, who will share a few views and perspectives from the IFAC SMP committee and share further insights on the topic of data analytics. So Katharine, if you can hear me, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kalina, and thanks to Mark as well for that very interesting practical presentation of how data analytics works for SMPs. It is an emerging area for SMPs and an important one, and I think possibly a critical one for how SMPs develop over the next decade. I'm delighted today to be addressing so many delegates from Central and Eastern Europe. I spent some 5 years in the mid-1990s in the region delivering auditing training, and I have very fond memories of working in places including Bulgaria and Romania and Serbia and Montenegro. And while technology means that we now have a choice about whether we travel, I have to say I envy you with your late summer sunshine now, because it is raining and beginning to get cold in Britain. Prior to being in Central Europe, I worked for Coopers & Lybrand and Ernst & Young, but for the last 20 years almost, I have worked for ICAAW. I'm a technical specialist in auditing standards, and I deal with all of ICAAW's responses to the IAASB and the PCAOB. I'm a member of IAASB's ISA 315 working group. And I've been on the SMPC for some 10 years. Next year will be my final year, and I'll be taking on the role of Deputy Chair in that year. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a little bit, first of all, about what the SMP committee does. It obviously does what it says on the tin. It represents the interests of small and medium-sized practitioners and comprises 18 members and technical advisors from 22 countries. Now, that is a huge range of people and interests. An SMP in Indonesia and an SMP in Germany have very different interests, but and the SMP committee has the benefit of and suffers from the same issues as all SMP committees in trying to cover such a wide range of areas. We have 3 main areas of focus. Input to policy, regulation and international standards, and I chair the subgroup that deals with that. But we also develop and share tools, guidance and support in the form of guides, and we have 3 guides. We have an ISA guide, we have a practice management guide, and we have a quality control guide, and they are there is huge take-up of those guides. They are translated into many different languages, and SMPs across the world find these valuable. This year we're updating the practice management guide, and we've got a new chapter on technology in that. And then finally, we promote the visibility and the recognition of SMPs. We're constantly striving to emphasize the importance of the work of SMPs and the SMEs that they service. We perform a global SMP survey which covers technology. And in addition, this year, the SME work programme specifically includes sharing intelligence on the impact of technology developments with SMPs. And we do this primarily through something called the Global Knowledge Gateway. Now, I urge you, if you've not yet seen IFAC's Global Knowledge Gateway, to go have a look at it. There is a link to it at the end of this presentation. There is a lot of very interesting stuff in there, the Global Knowledge Gateway. Kalina, could I now ask that we now go to slide 6, please? Can we just move forward a bit? Slide 6. Thank you. I wanted to talk first of all about 2 publications, ICAAW publications on data analytics. The first is called Audit Insights Data Analytics, and this is about what auditors know about what their clients do with data analytics. It's about what's actually happening on the ground through the eyes of auditors. An interesting overarching aspect of this is whether businesses whether auditors' clients use data analytics as a tool to achieve their existing objectives, to just carry on doing what they're doing, but doing it in a more efficient and competitive way, or whether they use it as a means to change the nature of the business itself. And of course, the answer to that is businesses are using it in both ways. If we can go to the next slide, please. Now, this publication provides many simple examples of how businesses actually use data analytics. You'll be aware that the technology emerged from financial services and engineering and was taken up by providers such as Google and eBay with their analytics. Of course, supermarkets have had data on us for many years, and they're now using it more efficiently than they used to. But the sort of examples that we've got in this publication are more detailed, but still quite simple examples. So, for example, managing fleets of vans carrying spares. The objective of analysing sat-nav data and integrating that with other data a company has is so that you can have fewer vans travelling less distance carrying lighter loads. Optimizing markdowns in retail using algorithms to increase the profit and take the guesswork out of provisioning. Previously, we used to say halve the price and see what happens. Now we can be much more accurate. Wider examples, evaluating the impact of health and safety training in the extractive industries and ex post analyses of resumes to highlight the effectiveness of HR procedures. A lot of HR policies, procedures traditionally up until 15-20 years ago were about what people believed were the right people were to recruit. There's a lot more evidence there now to support these policies and procedures. And then revenue collection and fraud detection in telcos. All telcos leak a certain percentage of their revenues, and what really matters to them is where they're leaking that revenue. Is it through the fraudulent use of handsets? Is it through card cloning? Is it through unauthorized use of legitimate accounts? Data analytics helps them understand where that revenue is going. Two aspects of these examples that come out here. One is the fact that we can eliminate to a great extent guesswork and judgment in managing a business. The subtitle of this publication is Evidence, Not Assumptions. The second interesting point I think about all of these examples is that you look at these and you think, well, if you had a pen and paper and enough time, or even an Excel spreadsheet, you could probably have done this without data analytics software. Well, you could have done, but you never would have done because it took too long, because it was inaccurate. Getting the data into the Excel spreadsheet would have taken forever and there would have been errors in it. And what data analytics has really done for business is to make this whole process faster, make it more accurate, more granular, and presenting the results graphically, which I think Mark's presentation shows so very clearly how you present these results graphically. Next slide, please. Other big issues, data analytics and governance. Who understands and controls the data and the models? Are they accountable? In smaller organisations in particular, the only people sometimes who understand the analytics and the models that are being used are actually quite a long way down the food chain as far as management is concerned. The decisions they make can have quite a significant influence on the business, and that is not necessarily recognised, and those people aren't necessarily represented on the board. And when SMPs are advising SMEs, they need to understand that. There's a risk of not responding to the data analytics challenge and treating it solely as an enhancement of control. There's a real sinister aspect to data analytics and an ethics issue. 20 years ago, using that example of the drivers and the fleets of vans, once the driver had left the depot in the morning, that was it for the day. Management only knew where that person was if a customer rang up to complain that they hadn't arrived, or when they got back to the depot to tell people what they'd been doing during the day. Now management can see exactly where people are and what they're doing at any point in the day. The view from 35,000 feet has become a bird's eye view. And if management only uses this technology to micromanage, it creates all sorts of behavioural problems, and that aspect of data analytics is more widely recognised now than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. The death of preventative controls as opposed to detective controls. Control has been set up in businesses forever to stop bad things happening, to stop things going wrong. Automation has meant that quality of control now is so good that the focus is now shifting to detective controls, and that is seeing what has happened immediately after it's happened, and the management of business is reflected in that. And then expectations of powers of regulators using data analytics in regulated industries. If you are a bank regulator, and in theory you can ask for vastly more information now than you could even 5 years ago, there is going to be an expectation that you will ask for that information. There's an expectation that's going to arise that you are somehow all-seeing and all-knowing. And of course, the reality is that bank regulators, like every other regulator, have resource limitations, and regulators are going to have to work to manage those expectations when there are failures in those regulated industries. Can we go to the next slide, please, and the next publication, which is a slightly older publication. It's 2016 again. I had the great privilege of editing this publication, Data Analytics for External Auditors, and this was interviews with 12 practitioners from large and medium-sized firms who were heavily engaged in data analytics, who are heavily engaged in data analytics in their firms, and it asks fundamental questions about the opportunities data analytics and indeed the threats of data analytics to auditors, to regulators, to standard setters, and to academics. And the next slide, please. As far as if you talk to auditors, external auditors about this, and as Mark has already said, data analytics is about audit quality. Regulators have a slightly different view of this, but as far as auditors are concerned, it's an opportunity for the profession to reinvent itself. Innovation in audit is absolutely essential, and it is happening. And one of the reasons it's happening is that if external auditors do not respond to market demands, and external audit does not take in the full benefits of data analytics, there is a risk that external audit will be marginalised, and this applies as much to SMPs as it does to larger firms. If your client is having its data analytics provided by a third party and it's not available within the external audit, how important is external audit? If you're a big firm, you cannot tender for a listed company audit anymore unless you have a good quality data analytics offering. The same is true now of medium-sized firms. The last 2 or 3 years, the mid-tier firms have developed their data analytics offerings enormously. And of course, if this takes root in the SMP market, the same will be true there. And we're telling our members at ICAEW that they need to keep on top of this, because if the firm down the road has this offering and you don't have this offering, who are your clients going to go to? Data analytics has the potential to improve, indeed transform the risk assessment process at the moment, but also substantive procedures and test of controls. It enables auditors to manipulate a complete data set. What is a complete data set? It's the whole purchase ledger. It's the whole sales ledger. It's all of the fixed assets. To visualize the results graphically, clients love those graphics. To do it easily, without necessarily having specialist training, if you're using software like Marks, and at speed, much faster than you used to be able to. It has the potential to enhance the quality of evidence consistently and cover entire populations. It provides broader, deeper, and more granular insights. And we know from the work that Mark has done with some of his clients that those clients in the UK that have taken up with data analytics, I have spoken to some of these practitioners, and their clients are just blown away by some of these things. How did you know that? Well, it's the data analytics that does it for us. Next slide, please. So commonly performed data analytics routines: inventory aging and how many days items are in stock, analyses of revenue trends, three-way matches, analyses of capital expenditure versus repairs and maintenance. Now you'll think, well, again, a lot of this can be done with basic analytics functions in spreadsheets. It can be done with a pen and paper, but it's not done because it's not done accurately, it's not done fast enough. It's because those basic analytics functions can't necessarily produce the graphics that clients are looking for now. And there's another big issue here, particularly for larger firms, and that's the interface between auditor and client systems. It is the biggest technical challenge, and always has been the biggest technical challenge: data validation and transformation. Now, in my personal view, data analytics is not new. We used to have computer-assisted audit techniques in the late 1990s, and they died a death. And the reason they died a death was because of these interfaces. The auditors simply could not get the data out of the client system and into the auditor system quickly, accurately, or easily enough. What Mark's software and his competitors' software enables firms to do is not to worry about that. That is the real value that providers like Mark are able to provide to SMPs. They completely get over that hurdle. That is the value, or part of the value of their technology. Larger firms have now overcome this. They've put a huge investment into the software to do that, but it still remains behind the scenes one of the biggest technical challenges for them. Next slide, please. Other challenges: data security and privacy issues. If your data is being transferred to servers in the USA, it's a big deal. If your data is being analysed in Indonesia, it's a big deal for some of your clients, and there will be legal and regulatory challenges to the movement of data. There are issues of investment in if you're doing this yourself for an SMP, there are big issues of investment in hardware, software, retraining and reskilling auditors, and recruiting data transformation specialists. We all know the big firms are doing this. They're shifting the focus of the skill set that the graduates they're recruiting. From an SMP point of view, the beauty of software that is designed specifically for SMPs is that it requires no special skills apart from basic technology skills on the part of those using it. We've already mentioned the ethical dilemmas, that management auditors can see things they've never been able to see before. Another interesting issue: audit pricing. Will future fees be based on the quality of client data? Basically, if you've got good quality client data, you'll have good quality analyses. It's still the same garbage in, garbage out, but there are some firms who are looking at the possibility of pricing their audits, at least in part, on the quality of client data. So that's two publications I would encourage you to go have a look at. The links are on the slides. Kalina, please may we go back to slide 3 at this point. My final area relates to Bob's presentation. Bob will talk in a moment about the IAASB's very high quality 2016 request for input, the document called Exploring the Growing Use of Technology in the Audit with a Focus on Data Analytics. Bob is the chair of the IAASB's DAWG, its DAWG, its Data Analytics Working Group. And that 2016 request for input, the SMP commented on, and I'd just like to run through a few of the comments that we made on the work that that Bob did in this area. We obviously welcomed and supported the initiative in what is a rapidly developing area, and we emphasised the fact that awareness among SMPs of data analytics is absolutely critical, because it does have the potential to transform the existing model and increase effectiveness and improve client service, and of course also give those SMPs that have the foresight to take this up a USP with regard to their competitors. And of course webinars such as these we are hoping will serve to help increase that awareness, but that communication must focus on the basic mechanics of it. Talking about it in abstract or a high level, got to talk about the nuts and bolts. This is an opportunity not to be missed for SMPs, but its uptake by SMPs is not guaranteed. And if we can go to the next slide, we will just look at some of the challenges to SMPs. The resource challenges are more acute for SMPs and SMEs. It's very unlikely that many SMPs are going to take up data analytics by building systems of their own in the way that the large firms have done. It's going to be down to providers like Mark and professional accountancy organisations to help them do this. Software providers, we need accessible and affordable tools to encourage adoption. In terms of standard setting, we encourage the IAASB to develop guidance on how data analytics fits within existing ISAs in the form of staff publications perhaps. And if we can go to the next slide. The IAASB in developing standards needs to ensure that future ISA changes are proportional and evidence-based. Now there's a real issue for standard setters here. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. If they start putting standards in place now, the technology is still evolving. It'll be evolving forever. They need not to act too soon in order not to become out of date. However, if they don't do anything at all, practitioners are open to challenge by regulators who, being regulators, can sometimes take a fairly conservative approach to innovation in audit. And I think this is a good example of why standards need to be, as IAASB standards seek to be, principles based, because when things are moving as fast as they are, it is only high level principles that will enable the standards to keep up with the technology and not be constrained by it. And it's a difficult challenge for IAASB, and I sympathise with its predicament. They're being pushed on the one hand to do something now and pushed by others not to do anything just yet. And education on data analytics and wider technology developments are not just for standard setters. Member organisations have a role to play. ICAW brings together ICAW brings together practitioners, training organisations, providers of software such as Mark and his competitors in the UK, and providers of software and methodologies. And the purpose of bringing these people together in the same room, and it's quite scary to be in the same room as all of your competitors and all of your potential clients at the same time. The purpose of that is so that everybody is aware of what is available, and what the challenges are. People need to talk to each other in this crucial development stage. And professional accountancy organisations have an important role to play in this. Data analytics also provides an opportunity to address recruitment and retention issues. It is essential that the profession continues to recruit the brightest and best, to the extent that it makes good use of the best data analytics software. It will continue to do that. It means you get different people with different ideas, with a slightly different focus, and that can only add to the depth and breadth of skills and experience of people working within the profession. Okay, slide 13, please, Kalina. Looking forward here, the audit of the future, people do have different views about this. When I talk to the deeply technical auditors, those rare people who are truly skilled in both audit, truly skilled and senior within both audit and in data analytics, they think that this technology has the potential to radically transform the nature of the audit. Others take the view that the current models are sound, and that all we've got are new tools to execute what we need to do here. I honestly don't know. I think it could be either of those. Excuse me. The pace of change is very fast. In the 2 years since I started producing that data analytics for external auditors publication, things have changed. It's not out of date yet, but in 5 years' time it will be. Standard setters, as we've already said, are caught between a rock and a hard place here. They need to keep up, but they don't need to move too fast. They need to keep the standards high level and principles based. But of course, this data analytics is only part of a wider digital journey here. We've got other issues here, cybersecurity. AI and blockchain are issues that we're looking at. The two that really interest me are AI and blockchain. AI will automate a lot of things that professional accountants currently do. And there are firms all over the world that are embracing that change and seeking to get on top of it and to add value elsewhere. Professional accountancy organisations need to help them with that. But blockchain is the technology that I think really has the scope to fundamentally change the way business, not only the businesses that businesses engage in, but also accounting system. I think it's an area that is very poorly understood. There's a lot of very poor quality information about blockchain. When you read stuff and you think this person doesn't really understand this, or they're repeating something that they've already heard. It will fundamentally change the nature of audit when that happens. And of course, data analytics is part of that story. I have to say that as an auditor who left practice well over 20 years ago, I have been really working on data analytics these last 3 years, really very excited about this. And it's quite, you don't often get excited about developments in auditing, but these are genuinely exciting changes. I think by the time we get to 2025, audit will look very, very different to those of us who started our professional careers in the 1980s. And these are very interesting times that we are living through, and I feel privileged to have had the opportunity to be part of that transformation. Thank you very much.
Katharine, thank you very much for your presentation. Let me hand over now to Bob, if Bob can hear us.
Yes, I'm here, Kalina. I hear you fine. Hopefully you hear me.
Yes, we hear you fine, Bob. I'm just going to switch your presentation and over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Kalina. And while Kalina is switching slides here, I'll just take a moment to thank both Katharine and Mark for their presentations and the demonstration of the InFlow technology. Mark, I think it's a good way to kind of lead into the topic that I'm going to spend a few minutes with everyone today on, and that is looking at the broader spectrum of responses that our International Audit and Assurance Standards Board, or IAASB, Data Analytics Working Group have responded, and thank you specifically for the kind words there, Katharine. As I said, if we just kind of move to the purpose of this session, Kalina, the Data Analytics Working Group, or DAWG as it's become affectionately known in the IAASB ranks, and I guess outside of that group also, was actually established at the end of 2015. So as Kalina shared in my brief bio introduction at the beginning of the webinar today, I joined the IAASB and began my term in 2015. When I joined the IAASB, one of the first working groups that I became a member of was a standing working group that the IAASB has called the Innovation Working Group. And the purpose of that working group is to monitor and keep track of developments in the profession that are not to the point yet of requiring a full response or work effort on behalf of the IAASB or perhaps some other committee from IFAC or such, but that the Innovation Working Group monitors developments in those areas, and then when there seems to be a great enough interest, especially a public interest, the working group then recommends via a project proposal for further work to be done. So in 2015, the IAASB had issued a request for feedback and comment on its work plan. And noticeably within the work plan document, there was a rather long list of projects, as you might imagine, that the IAASB was planning on taking on. But data analytics as a separate topic was not specifically mentioned by the IAASB, actually. However, when analysis of the comments and feedback from our stakeholders was gathered, we were able to conclude that actually data analytics was a write-in vote from many commenters. So a kind of unsolicited commenters and stakeholders had come back to us and said this is an area that the IAASB should devote some attention to. Therefore, late in 2015, we formed our data analytics working group that I've had the honor and privilege of chairing. Throughout the first part of 2015, the working group did extensive outreach to many different constituencies. We had discussions with all of the larger mid-tier and larger accounting firms. We spoke with representatives of Katharine's small and medium practices committee. We talked to regulators. We talked to standard setters. We talked to investors. We talked to those charged with governance and board members. And all of that outreach ultimately concluded with the document that's been referred to a couple of times today, which was our request for input, exploring the growing use of technology in the audit with a focus on data analytics. Or short for what we called our request for input. That document was actually published in September of 2016, and we asked for comments on that document to be returned to us by the 15th of February of this year. So if we move to the next slide, Kalina, please. So the comment period, clearly has closed, and we have prepared summaries of questions that we posed within that document. The document essentially laid out several different aspects. It was a mixture of a summary of the outreach results that we had performed as a working group. It was also the working group's, a bit of the working group's vision about what the future, especially with respect to standard setting, might hold. And, quite honestly, the purpose of the paper was really to ask our stakeholders at large whether there was anything that we were missing or there were thoughts that we hadn't thought about to make sure that we had a fully informed basis before we decided how we were going to move forward as a board. Also, one of the things that came out of our working group activity was a little bit of a unique approach by the IAASB, which, because of the evolving nature of this topic, as well as its applicability or its impact on a variety of our stakeholders, we formed a project advisory panel. That project advisory panel is a group of 20 to 25 individuals that are comprised of regulators and investors, analysts, preparers, board members, some practitioners, certainly the national standard setters, but they're really people who have an acute interest or real keen interest in this topic. And that project advisory panel has served us well because it's afforded us as a working group the opportunity on some specific issues to reach out directly to individuals that have particular expertise or interest in those topics and seek more input and help us formulate some of the ideas that we've been able to put forth. We've also, I should mention, two specific points of dialogue and outreach we've had. The first one, actually not listed on this slide, but you may see it. It's actually available, posted on the IAASB website, is a video recording of a panel discussion or a discussion question and answer session that two of my colleagues on the working group and myself did back in late 2016 with some individuals that represented IFAR. IFAR is the International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators. And it's comprised of representatives ranging from the FRC certainly to the PCAOB and other market regulators, audit regulators around the world. I'd encourage you to watch that video. It's not for the star quality certainly of the individuals on the video, but I think the content, the topic, and the discussion was really good. It's not very long. It's less than 30 minutes, so I encourage that. We also specifically reached out to the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board in the U.S., primarily not so much to to pay them special attention in the way of providing input to our group, but more from the perspective that we had learned that they are taking on a project of their own with respect to data analytics, and we wanted to ensure that our dialogue was open with that body. We've done the same with the FRC in the UK, for example, to make sure that as we go down this road, and particularly as the IAASB is very concerned about the interest of small to medium practitioners, to make sure that we're not going down divergent roads that will only lead to confusion and ineffectiveness some point in the future. So we continue that outreach. Now, as we move to the next slide, just a little bit more detail with respect to the actual responses that we received to our request for input. I won't go through all the detail and read the slide back to you, but overall we received 50 comments from various stakeholders. Certainly Mark's organization was one. Katharine, I think, can hold up two hands because we got the SMP committee view as well as the ICAEW. So happy to have Katharine as supportive in that perspective. But you can see it was a good variety of respondents that we got back. If you're interested, the Small to Medium Practices Committee of the IFAC falls into the member body and other professional organization category. But you know, we've heard already today, and thank Mark and his organization for their feedback and their comments that they provided, and Katharine has also gone into a little bit of discussion about what the SMPC specifically came back with. So the balance of the time that I have with you, I'd just like to share some of the high-level feedback and comment we got from the 47 other responders, and bearing in mind again the variety of input and responses that we received in the various stakeholders. So if we look at the next slide, what I've tried to capture here is at a very high level, some, you know, in 3 or 4 or 5 bullet points, what are some overall kind of overarching conclusions that we could be reached in assimilating all the responses that we've received. First of all, we received great, overwhelming support for the initiative that we undertook, and to a commenter, I don't believe there was anybody who indicated that it was not a worthwhile project or that the IAASB should not spend its time in this area. So that, of course, was very encouraging to our working group. There were very positive remarks about the request for input document, having already identified many of the important issues and early stage analysis. I think the request for input that we published was a little bit of a trailblazer for the IAASB, because, as I said, it was really a mixture of reporting out feedback we'd received combined with some of the forward thinking of the actual working group, and then laying out possible future actions and things like that. So there was appreciation for the robustness of the document. The commenters encourage continued active participation in standard-setting activities as current projects progress, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later to try to illustrate in a little bit more detail what that comment is all about. There was a very strong and consistent recognition that data analytics has the ability to enhance audit quality. As a matter of fact, we were a little bit concerned at some stages of our project as we've progressed through that there, you know, were some concerns by some that were viewed in our outreach as this being another ploy by large firms to cross-sell services, if you will, that performing data analytics was nothing more than an inroad to being more efficient, cutting audit fees, and then providing, in the way of management advice and risk and advisory services, insights gained from the actual application of the analytics. And I think, you know, both Mark and Katharine have illustrated well how some of the analytics applied certainly, you know, can add value to a company, particularly if they have not viewed their information in that manner before. But the constant theme that came back was to make sure that the IAASB stayed focused on our mission, which is addressing audit standards to try to enhance audit quality to the greatest extent that we can. And I'll have a little more detail there also. must provide a clear explanation of what is meant by data analytics. I think Katharine touched on this. Many of the analytics that are performed today could be done manually. They could be done via Microsoft Excel spreadsheets. They can use Mark's product, that type of software. There's other off-the-shelf products. There's bespoke programs that are used. And so from a standards perspective, when we're talking about data analytics, what is it that we're actually talking about? And we had a mixed reaction. Some respondents called for us creating or developing a definition of audit data analytics, while others discouraged us from going down that route for fear that once you create a definition, you've almost intentionally excluded or perhaps unintentionally excluded some of the aspects that we'd like to deal with. So to this point yet, we have not undertaken an effort to provide a definition around audit analytics other than to roughly or at a high level indicate that they're analytical procedures that are often accomplished through the use of technology, and kind of leaving it at that high level for the time being. We also received, cautions, I guess, from many respondents about the way forward. Warnings or admonitions about, targeted changes versus a separate standard. For example, there were some respondents that hold the view that there's an entirely new ISA that's required that is specifically targeted at all aspects of data analytics. And then there were other respondents that said, well, no, that's not really appropriate because data analytics can impact any stage of an audit, process within an audit procedure. Their variety and use are unending, and thus maybe it's better approach to look at each ISA individually and assess whether there's changes either in the way of requirements or actual application material that might be good to take on there. So, Katharine or Kalina, if we can move to the next slide. So the overall structure of the actual request for input was there was 5 or 6 specific questions that we asked for feedback on. The first one had to do, and for each of the questions, the working group provided some background, again, on outreach, some thoughts of the working group, and then asked the respondents for their views on a particular question. So the first one asked for reflections on circumstances and factors that impact the use of data analytics. And it was interesting to come back here and understand that one of the first things or most prevalent things that came back was that the IAASB needed to make sure that we had top of mind that data analytics cannot and should not actually replace good, sound professional skepticism and judgment. I know one of the early discussions that I had with our consultative advisory group, one of those members very pointedly asked me the question about whether I believed that the onset and more rampant use of data analytics would replace the need for well, let's call them people like me, perhaps. Let's kindly refer to us as more experienced auditors that might not be so proficient with technology. If that, data analytics would actually, reduce the need for those types of people. And actually, the answer that we've been able to come to is the converse is actually the true. As the data analytics and some of the routines and some of the output is received, I think it's even more important that professional judgment is applied and skepticism around what is the information, the data really telling us. Is it reliable? Can conclusions be drawn from it? So the short answer is skepticism and judgment absolutely remain a very important element going forward. Other circumstances, and I think both Mark and Katharine have addressed this, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but we were reminded that the cost of different varieties of data analytic techniques may be a barrier to entry for certain practices, practitioners, firms, etc. So with the focus today on the small to medium-sized practitioners, I think that's very relevant, and as I said, I think Katharine and Mark have covered that off well, and we take that very seriously. Concerns over underlying data provided by the client has also been touched on. One doesn't have to look very far these days to see new data privacy regulations issued. I know the GDPR coming on in the European Union, effective in May 2018, is one far-reaching impact. So all of this concern around third-party sources, reconciliation, accuracy, reliability, security, privacy are things that we were told that we should pay particular attention to. The second question, as we move to the next slide, had to do with standard setting challenges. So we asked, again, after laying out what we believe to be some challenges, we asked our respondents whether they saw any other challenges or had a particular strong agreement or disagreement with the views of our working group. This was interesting in that, again, overall there was general support that we had captured many of the standard setting challenges. One of the themes that came back was that really at its core core, perhaps, with respect to data analytics, is really addressing the issue around sufficiency and appropriateness, the quality of audit evidence that's required and can be gained through the application of data analytics. And so we took that certainly to heart. Impact on hours and fees, that's one that typically the IAASB shies away from. We do remain focused on quality and don't get into the economics of audit engagements very much. However, again, a couple of aspects of hours and fees I think are important. The issue around whether costs are a barrier to entry, I think, are very relevant. And again, that inappropriate or incorrect presumption, I guess, by some parties that firms that use these techniques are just making a play to sell extended services or advisory services. So we have taken that to heart and will be cognizant of that going forward. The use of technology around the world is impacted by culture and education. We don't have time to go into today all of the myriad issues around skills, expertise, training, educational systems, academics, all of those types of things, but certainly that came through in the responses. Data architecture challenges, I think Mark alluded to, for example, the number of different accounting systems just in the UK. If we're really going to get good and proficient with data analytics, it would be nice if we had some standardized audit data structure in the world. If the software developers and marketing companies and things like that would agree on a standard, it would make life much easier. That's a bit outside of the purview, of course, of the IAASB, but it was cited as a challenge. Development of cross-functional skills, that kind of speaks for itself, and the need to include regulators in the process. So I think those were some very good reminders for us. But overall, the respondents indicated that we had done a pretty good job of capturing the standard-setting challenges. The next question we posed for our responders for the next slide had to do with our views about possible solutions to those standard-setting challenges. I want to preface this by saying, again, the link to changes in the standards and audit evidence requirements, I think, are key. However, I know Katharine alluded to this balancing act that we keep bumping into. There was an overall sentiment, I think, on the part of certainly a good majority of the responders that the ISAs are not broken. There's nothing in the ISAs that prohibit the use of data analytics. On the other hand, there were those that expressed the view, well, that's true, but there's nothing in the ISAs that encourages the use of data analytics or permits the use overtly of data analytics. And so we've really had to walk a tightrope here on where we go with this issue. And for a couple of reasons, I guess. One is if we come through, there's a consensus that the proper use of data analytics certainly can result in a higher quality audit, at least acquisition of higher quality audit evidence in most cases, if done appropriately. The problem that we probably have from a standard setting perspective is if we introduce requirements in our standards around the use of data analytics, then a couple of questions immediately pop into mind, the first of which is, well, if the basis for new requirements is that this is a higher quality audit, then are we actually saying a more traditional substantive audit is no longer acceptable? In other words, are we raising the bar and really setting a new paradigm for auditing into the future? That I think is a big concern. That coupled with, again, some of the concerns of the small to medium practice, elements of our profession around cost and all the other challenges that we have, I think we need to be very careful that we aren't setting up requirements that aren't necessary, aren't setting the right course, aren't sending the right message. Because I think the deliberations of the board to this point have indicated that both a more traditional substantive approach to the audit as well as a more innovative, forward-looking approach using data analytics, both can result in high-quality audits as required by the standards. So we've balanced that, as best we can thus far, probably looking at application material and things like that, but even with those changes, one needs to be careful about creating impressions about preferability of procedures. So we'll continue, down that path, exploring that. We got pointers or recommendations to consider non-authoritative type guidance, such as staff publications and IAPNs, which are International Assurance Practice Notes, to do more work outside of the standards themselves. There were calls to clarify the extent of IT control implications when using data analytics. That essentially gets back especially to internally generated data and whether we've done enough work to ensure its completeness, its accuracy, its reliability, its integrity, so on and so forth. And then as I mentioned, and clearly the element of today's focus is address those issues that arise from applying data analytics to audits of SMEs. Now, I do want to just stop there for a second, and the SME issue was intentional. And that is because while many firms, you can look at them as being, classified by size of their practice, even within a firm, a firm will have a variety of size of clients, ranging from very small clients to large clients. In international global networks, such as my own, we have a wide variety of size and sophistication of member firms. And then within those member firms, there's a variety of size and sophistication of clients. So we were cautioned in this to not necessarily just focus on the size of the practice, but also how those are applied to an audit of different types of entities is something also to be considered. The next question as we move on that we addressed was whether the working group's involvement in the current IAASB project setting efforts was appropriate. General feedback was that there was support for our perspective and involvement in IAASB projects and that's essential. So essentially the perspective that the board has taken at this point is not to make go down the road of creating a new ISA or embedding just kind of knee-jerk new requirements and things like that, but for the working group to be feeding into input to all of the current standard-setting projects to make sure that data analytic concerns and opportunities are reflected in those standards as they go forward. And those currently involve everything ranging from quality control at both the firm and the engagement level to ISA 315 on risk assessment, also incorporating our project on ISA 540 on auditing management estimates and all the other projects that are currently underway. We did get pushes from many respondents that we should be moving faster, which is encouraging. It's nice to hear as a working group. Probably caused a little heartburn from the perspective of IAASB resource allocation and things like that, but we continue to move forward as quickly as prudent on these issues. There was encouragement that we work in concert with our sister organization on international standards, the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, in dealing with issues related to independence. So that's that issue around selling additional services, the application of skepticism and quality control, and we have undertaken special joint efforts in that area. And then, as I mentioned earlier, caution against premature standard setting, I think Katharine actually alluded to. By the time that we would issue a new standard on data analytics, if we're talking about specific technologies and techniques, they will be outdated by the time we would get something issued. So the advice or the feedback that we've gotten is to make sure that, for lack of better terminology, we are going to future-proof our standards, and as Katharine mentioned, probably principles-based standards is the best way to do that. And then finally, as we move to the next slide, we asked whether our respondents had any feedback for us in the way of their awareness of other initiatives that were underway that we should be talking to and taking advantage of, corresponding with, coordinating with. And the respondents came back, of course, by local jurisdiction, especially with a number of different entities and projects underway. And you can see on the slide I've mentioned some of those, not the least of which is the SMPC. Canada has some significant work going on. Katharine has mentioned the ICAW in the UK. The PCOB I mentioned earlier. INTOSI is the international group of Supreme Audit institutes. That's the public sector organization, et cetera. So a number of good suggestions that we will continue taking forward there. As we move to the next slide, kind of moving into our next steps, the reflections that we garnered, we proposed some next steps. We had no real objections to where we proposed going, only support, and that was to continue to conduct further outreach, to host more roundtables with audit firms of all sizes. Our outreach conducted to this point has been what I would call more general. I think the working group has to roll up our sleeves a little bit and get into some of the detail and look how things are actually being done on client engagements, and so we'll continue to work with audit firms in that capacity. Certainly today's outreach, the webinar today, and other webcasts and podcasts that we can do to educate and raise awareness are well received. I mentioned the standard setting. You can see the number of, this is just an example of the number of different standards that are impacted potentially. So everything from audit evidence to audit documentation to use of experts to risk assessment to auditing management estimates. We haven't even mentioned audit sampling. and some other pertinent standards, and we'll continue to look at those and provide input into those projects that are currently existing. And I earlier had mentioned the issuance of the non-authoritative standards. So as we move to my final slide then, just to finish off, where is the data analytics working group going in the direction that we've received from the IAASB, the full board? We are in the process of finishing a very detailed analysis and summary of the 50 comment letters that we got back. What is of interest there is with these 6 basic questions that we posed, we're analyzing whether responses differed in any significant way depending on the type of organization that responded. So particularly interested, for example, whether regulators hold a different view than practitioners, or whether investors are looking at something different than those charged with governance, for example. So we'll be discussing that in a couple of weeks at our IAASB board meeting and making a presentation to the full board on those results, and then looking at a publication coming forward to share those in the future. We already have engaged, as a matter of fact, last week, further engagement with the ISA 315 or risk assessments task force that has very significant work underway. Katharine's a member of that task force, so had the pleasure of seeing Katharine last week in Washington, D.C. Mentioned the interaction with the other task forces and the continued targeted roundtables. So you can see we were very pleased with our responses to the request for input. Nothing but very, I think, strong and consistent encouragement to keep up the work, to keep it going forward. The challenge, of course, is to do that with the resources available and other very high priority projects that are on the IAASB's agenda at this point. But it is a topic that's not going to go away. Certainly, I think it is essential to the continued relevance of the profession for members, for firms of all sizes, of all practices. And with that, we will keep our momentum going forward. And I'll thank you for the opportunity, Kalina and her colleagues, especially Mark, Katharine, for the opportunity to share this quick overview of our work from the IAASB perspective today. With that, Kalina, I'll turn it back to you. I believe we'll move to a question and answer session now.
Thank you, Bob, for this very interesting presentation, and also for having an opportunity to hear about the summary, high-level summary of the responses you have gotten to the request for input. I understand, as you mentioned now, a full document will be available sometime in September 2017, so it was useful to hear now before just highlights what the responses are. Let me move on now to the question and answer session. Before I call to the participants for any incoming questions, I have prepared a few for Mark, Katharine, and Bob. And let me start with the first one, which comes back to the results of the SMP survey. We saw that in the responses for Europe, SMPs are highlighting several key challenges in using technology. One of it is investing and staying current with software, and the other, second by significance, was determining what technology is best for their practice. In this sense, Mark, Katharine, and Bob, can you please give some useful tips and advice with the SMPs and the practitioners online, how to approach these challenges and what tips you can share with them in this sense? So I don't know who would like to start, but it's either Mark, Katharine, or Bob. You can provide some comments on this. Thank you.
Well, perhaps maybe I'll just make a kind of a corollary comment, and then I think probably Katharine and in particular Mark might have some more insight into particularly the European region. One thing I just will point out is, first of all, the challenges around keeping current with technology, acquisition of technology, use of technology is not entirely limited or particularly focused into the small and medium practices. I can tell you the IAASB outreach with the larger firms, even the mid-tier, we're all struggling to some extent to stay current, especially with respect to expertise, skills, and training. Much of the commercial software available today, I think it's more a matter of learning the full capabilities of those tools and how they can be applied. But even the Big Four, what we've learned is, yes, they do some bespoke development of data mining and process mapping and things like that. The issue there is that those systems that are designed in that manner are really only designed for a particular client engagement. Now, of course, they have huge engagements, so they can make that type of investment. But they too realize that they have to leverage what's available in the commercial market today. So that's just an observation I'd share with that, and I'm sure Mark and Katharine can add to that.
Thank you, Bob. Katharine, would you like to share from your perspective a few tips for the SMPs and other practitioners regarding these two challenges?
Yes, thanks, Kalina. I mean, as Bob says, technology is a significant investment for absolutely everyone, and the consequences of getting it wrong worry people. And you're looking at a combination of accounting software, auditing software, and data analytics software. But my sense is that firms are actually doing this, and one of the reasons they're doing it is because their clients are asking them exactly the same questions. And if a firm is thinking to itself, well, should I go down this route or should I wait a bit? It's a balancing act, but to an extent, doing nothing is not an option. If you're a practitioner and your main competitor down the road is taking to clients in your local town or city Mark's whizzy software and his graphics, and they're also saying to the clients, and by the way, we don't actually have to be on site as much as we used to be, and the audit fee is going to stay the same. Who are you going to choose? For SMPs that are seeking a competitive advantage, this is pretty much a surefire way of at least getting yourself noticed. It's going to take time to get a return on your investment. It's not going to be instant. It never is. But it's one of the things that when we first looked at this that we warn practitioners of is they need to be aware of what's going on, because if they're not aware, there is a very real risk they're going to get run over by the whole technology as competitors take it on. And once your competitors take it on and they're up to speed and all the rest of it, it may be too late for you. And then on a completely different note, just dealing with this, technology is and can be intimidating. And in terms of advice to SMPs, if you don't understand what Mark and his competitors are talking about, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask dumb questions. I say this from personal experience because I had to ask a lot of dumb questions when preparing those ICAAW publications, and it was a humbling experience, but an extremely valuable one. And you've got to be prepared to sort of put your pride aside a bit in order to learn and understand what the opportunities are and what the risks are, so that you can make an informed decision.
Thank you, Katharine. Mark, if you can please also add some comments on this question. Thank you.
Yes, I'll try to do it as unbiasedly as I possibly can. But I think for me, because I have been the other side where I've been evaluating and making those buying decisions around tools and technologies. For me, one of the most important things to consider was how ready is this solution straight out of the box? How aware of my world and my environment is this supplier and this vendor? Do they understand that there is ISAs, there are regulations, there are detailed requirements over documentation, evidence gathering, etc. So do they understand my world? Can I rely on this solution as it is built right now? And am I going to get the support that I need if I need support from these guys to be able to apply and adopt these kind of technologies? I think as soon as you're there's imminently hundreds of different ideas and solutions out there, and I was speaking to the head of audit for a large top 6 firm in the UK recently, who said you need to kiss a lot of frogs sometimes to find the one prince that's out there that really is the solution that you need here. But I think it then comes down to being able to understand whether this is something that's going to need a lot of integration, going to need a lot of modification and bespoke building by you or your team to be able to get it to work for you as you would like it to, or whether it is fit for purpose, ready to go. And I think the other piece is, as Bob and Katharine touched on as well, is because this is evolving so quickly, do the people that you're talking to understand that there is a future here and there's a progression and that this is going to advance and that they're going to go on that journey with you and take you to the machine learning, the AI, the blockchains that have been touched on here today? Are they aware of that? Are they ready for these kind of capabilities? Or are you just looking at one siloed purpose-built thing that's going to do one thing for you? So I think there's a lot of things to think through there, but I would stress that I've been very advocative that I think a lot of the people we speak to are looking for the professional accounting organizations, the PAOs, to have a view and have an awareness of what is out there and what is working for their members. And as Katharine touched on, being prepared to ask those questions around what are people using, what is their experience so far, are these guys giving us what we need? We need that more open, more collaborative approach to this as a profession, rather than all trying to solve exactly the same problem.
Thank you, Mark. Since I have you now talking, I will keep you online a little bit more and ask another question. You spoke a little bit in your presentation about the different challenges that SMPs are facing when it comes to technology and data analytics relative to larger accountancy firms. My question is, can you briefly just summarize, in your view, the key advantages and disadvantages also that SMPs can have compared to larger firms when it comes to a digital technology agenda, and how SMPs can actually maximize these advantages you spoke about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the simplest ways to think about this is that the big firms are working with such a large volume of totally different clients, ranging from financial services clients all the way through to SME owner managed businesses, and there's such a variety and a volume and so many different people using performing that work that one of the imminent challenges is being able to have a consistent way of performing work to maintain the quality and the standards that you require as a firm. And so to be able to run effectively these quite sophisticated change management processes, to be able to move from one way of working to a slightly different way of working and be able to migrate all of your organization and all of your clients to that consistent way of working is quite a challenge, and it's quite hard to even obtain the buy-in from so many different stakeholders across these large organizations. And when I touched on, I feel that SMPs are in a better position to move more quickly on some of these areas. It's because you're typically working with a smaller management team who can make quick decisions and can unanimously agree on a way that they want to, even in some cases, just trial a product or trial something in a discrete area and see how that works with some of their really friendly clients who are prepared to give a new technique a go and understand the relationship there that is very close, one of a broader trusted advisor, because they aren't dealing with necessarily some of the very complicated independence requirements that are prevalent with the top end listed organizations. So I think it's one more of agility and a better ability to pilot and trial techniques, and a shorter lead time to be able to roll out and deploy things more consistently. However, the key thing there is the tone at the top, the culture, and the readiness and willingness of that organization to embrace change. And I think that is one of the key challenges as well as key opportunities in terms of we very much observe that we don't view our customers based on size, to be honest with you. It's really often about the mindsets of the individuals that are making those decisions and leading those organizations. So I wouldn't necessarily overly generalize, but I think there's lots of opportunities there and plenty of ways that SMPs can take advantage.
Thank you, Mark. Katharine, you spoke about all of the initiatives that are happening at the ICAEW in terms of putting together various technology providers and asking questions and raising awareness about data analytics and technology. In your view, can you share with the participants what is the single most useful thing that national, regional, and global professional accountancy bodies can be doing in order to support SMEs in this digital agenda?
Well, thank you, Kalina. I'm not sure I can give you a single most important thing. There are a few of them, and I mentioned a moment ago the value in national PAOs bringing together providers of software, methodologies, training, and the firms themselves, so that you can try and match up what is available with what's needed. And of course, at the moment, what's available and what's needed don't match up. And frankly, we would like to see quite a few more marks in competitors, and there are competitors elsewhere in the world. But we need more of this, and we need the PAOs to help providers of this type of technology bring it to their members. And in some jurisdictions, of course, it's well established practice that the PAO itself, the professional accountancy body, works with the provider in order to provide the technology directly to its members. Now, that's not what we do in the UK, because we have a very deep and mature market for these types of services. But even within the UK, it needs a PAO to bring Mark and his competitors into a room with the providers, with the practitioners, so that direct questions can be asked. In some jurisdictions, it will be the PAO itself that needs to work with the provider. On a regional basis, it helps that organisations such as Accountancy Europe understand what's going on in different jurisdictions within Europe, and I know they are looking at this. And of course, IFAC itself is talking to regulators, national standard setters, practitioners, as well as people like Mark. It was something we've not talked about in any of these presentations, or we've only touched on very briefly, is the impact of audit inspectors in this area. Auditor behaviour is driven by how audit inspectors drive them to behave, and one of the drivers of the production of the two publications I referred to in my presentation was the fact that firms felt that regulators in the UK were deciding for themselves how the standards should be interpreted in the light of data analytics, and they wanted a wider debate about that. Bringing the regulators into that debate, and we were very pleased to have the regulator on board in preparing those publications. Regulated behaviour drives auditor behaviour, and when PAOs, if they are not the regulator, and increasingly the PAO is not the regulator, it's important to include regulators in that discussion, because what they think will drive how auditors behave. And just one other issue with this. One challenge for everyone involved is intellectual property. I have the sense that we're at the stage here where there is a willingness to share, but we've all talked about the significance of the investment in this technology. It's not cheap, and it's not free. And everyone involved, including professional accountancy organisations, needs to respect that IP and the value of this technology in all of those discussions. I think that's an important point not to be lost.
Thank you, Katharine. Bob, one final question for you. And often SMPs, and especially SMPs from developing countries, they are not so active to respond, or their responses are fewer to requests for input, similar as the Data Analytics Working Group has issued, or similar requests. The question is this the case for the particular request for input? Did you receive a sufficient amount of responses from SMPs from developing countries? And if no, we heard about some of the initiatives that you will be undertaking in the future, education events and awareness raising. But is there any specific targeted work or activities you plan to have in order to encourage a stronger voice in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Kalina. That's a good question. I guess, directly as it relates to the responses we received from the request for input, certainly we do a lot of work with the SMP committee, who does represent the interests of those firms. The other thing I think, and I mentioned this earlier, direct responses from individual smaller practices within the European region were very limited with respect to the request for input. And that's understandable to some degree, because I know we're all busy and it takes some time to do this and everything. We're doing a couple of things, though, I think that is important to understand. I mentioned earlier that global networks are comprised of member firms of all size and stature. So as we talk to those networks, global networks, comprising these firms around the world, we are specifically asking for input from their smaller members. So it's a little bit, when we get a comment letter, from one of the mid-tier global networks, for example, it does not reflect in our statistics as being, small to medium practice input, but in fact that response is oftentimes informed by responses they've reached out within their own network. So I think that's important. The second element of this is in January of 2017, earlier this year, in Paris, we had our first IAASB SMP specific outreach event, a two-day event that went very well in Paris, and great representation from SMPs across the Nordic region as well as Europe in particular. And we are continuing to do that. We've heard the call from the IAASB perspective that the larger firms, the larger networks always respond to these things, but it's on us, I guess, as a board to make sure that we're especially cognizant and take special efforts to reach out to get the input of practices of all sizes and shapes. And I know planning is already underway for our second outreach event with the SMPs coming up at the beginning of next year, and we have a sponsor for that, so that's all well and good. And we continue that dialogue and encourage it. As a matter of fact, I would just conclude by saying, we don't need to have well thought out, written, in-depth, works of art to attain feedback. Phone calls, emails, short notes, memos do the trick for us also. And if in doubt, just, I would encourage you, any member of the working group, drop a quick email, say you have a thought. We'll make sure that someone gets back to you and has a conversation with you. So we appreciate all that feedback.
Thank you very much, Bob. Let me now call to the participants and to ask if there are any incoming questions. In case there is a question, please unmute your computers or your microphones, and please go ahead now. Let me thank, first of all, Mark, Katharine, and Bob for their excellent presentations, and also thank all of you very much for your active participation. Let me mention a few announcements. First, this distance learning event is being recorded, and an edited version will be available soon on our web site. We will notify you once this becomes available. The second announcement is using this opportunity to advertise the upcoming Audit Training of Trainers workshop that will take place on October 2nd, 3rd this year in Vienna at the Joint Vienna Institute. The invitations and the agenda will follow soon, and the focus of the module will be on audit conclusion and reporting. I'm looking forward to seeing many of you then and reconnecting since our last meeting. Please also visit the CFRR homepage for more details on our upcoming events. Let me thank all of you again and wish you a pleasant afternoon. Goodbye.